Hello and welcome to the Japanglish Show. I'm your host, Ash Hatchet, and today, in the very first episode of Japanglish, I'm going to be talking about a few things in the Japanese news recently and answering any questions you may have. And if you have anything that you'd like to ask me, leave it in the comments below or email me through the show, japanglish@gmail.com, and I'll answer as many as I can in the next show. But for now, let's get straight on into the news. Okay, last week, NHK, the Japanese broadcasters, made a false announcement that North Korea had launched a missile over Japan's northernmost island, Hokkaido, and they had landed 2,000 kilometers off the island closer to China. The announcement was completely fake, and NHK claimed it was a practice for what to do if it were to happen. The exact same thing happened in January of 2018, and like this time, NHK were forced to make a national apology. I remember something similar to this actually happening last year, or the year before, something like that, when the BBC posted on Twitter that the Queen had died, when really they were doing a drill for what happened on BBC News or something when she does. And the person who tweeted it didn't even get in trouble. When he got in trouble, he didn't get fired. I'm not sure about the story from Japan yet, but I imagine they were sacked considering how strict the work life in Japan is. Unfortunately, considering how strict the work life in Japan is, unfortunately. And I think if their name were to ever be released to the public, it's likely they're never going to get a job again. Or at least find great difficulty in getting one. But that's one of the very few things I have to complain about Japan, although that's just the way they are. The work life is very, very integrated into their culture. Anyway, I have a question from someone asking about a Japanese tradition involving buying KFC on Christmas Day and asking why this is a thing. And I can tell you that I actually do know the answer to this question, and it's because such a small percentage of Japan's population are Christian, so it's never really been celebrated in Japan, and they don't make such a big deal about it like we do here in the UK. But in the UK, we don't really celebrate a festival like Thanksgiving nationally. There are still people that celebrate it, but not enough for a big deal to be made about it. And it's the same in Japan on this occasion, because not so much of a big deal is made about it. Students don't tend to get days off school. People don't tend to get days off work, and shops tend to be open on Christmas Day, and KFC is one of them. So while they do make a big special Christmas menu, sort of, to represent other countries and cultures and the 1% of the Japanese population that are Christian, and do celebrate Christmas. So it's sort of become a tradition to go out and get KFC, because they do a big Christmas menu, and it's a good chance to get together with family and bond over fried chicken. Although personally, I think another reason they choose to go to KFC is because Japanese people are very much into their meat, and this links to another question I got. I got a question from my friend Sam, who asked, do they only eat rice in Japan? And I was quite surprised when I found this out myself, but often Westerners tend to associate Asian countries such as Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam, all those countries of eating a lot of rice, probably because it's grown in that sort of region. But take Japan, for example, and a lot of the food they eat there is meat, especially chicken, rather than your typical rice or noodles, as another person asked me. So yeah, if you go to Japan, you're going to find a lot of meat there, or at least meat incorporated into another dish like sushi or ramen. And taking that back to the UK again, I found out rather recently that the national dish of the UK, despite popular belief, isn't an English breakfast. It isn't a roast dinner, and it isn't even fish and chips. It's actually a chicken tikka masala, which is a curry. Although it originated in the UK, despite it's often linked to being an India-only sort of thing. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a very mild curry, which makes sense taking into account the British people's tolerance of spices, which isn't zero, but on the other hand, it isn't much either. So yeah, you have it. There you have it, sorry. That's why Japanese people often have KFC on Christmas Day, and whether or not they only eat rice and noodles all day, and I can tell you they absolutely do not. I hope I answered your questions, and now moving on to our next news story of the week. And a ship has washed up on the island of Sado, approximately 900 kilometers away from North Korea, across the Sea of Japan. The fishing vessel was very badly damaged and believed by experts to have been North Korean due to the Hangul characters seen on the hull, although it is also possible that it could have been South Korea, seeing as they used the same writing system. It is thought to be North Korean, though, due to the fact that many fishing boats actually go missing due to the North Korea's demand for fish, and it's increased a lot over the recent years, so fishing boats are now going a lot further out into sea, further away from North Korea, and they tend to get lost a lot more often now. The boat and the people had been very much decomposed due to water damage, and only 5 of the 7 people on board were identified as being male, and none of the victims could be named. This is definitely not by far the first time that something like this has happened. In 2019 alone, 156 North Korean boats became stuck in Japanese Sound or were found drifting in Japanese water, and due to the frequency of this, they've been given their own name of ghost ships. In October, 60 North Korean crew members were rescued and taken safely to Japan after their boat sank when it collided with a Japanese patrol boat not far from the location of this incident. And so far, a statement has not been made, or at least not that I can find one that's been translated into English. I have another question concerning Japan and their culture, and it reads, do they eat dogs in Japan? And there's a short answer really and a long answer to this, I think. In short, no, but in a bit more detail, yes, but not regularly. Every country has people who eat weird things. I'm sure there are people in the UK who illegally eat animals such as dogs and stuff like that, as there probably is in Japan. It's not legal to eat dogs in Japan, and the only places I know of where it is China and Taiwan, I think. You can eat dogs there. But every culture will eat something supposedly weird for their culture. For example, I know in South Korea a popular dish is pork belly, which isn't something we'd eat in the UK, and it does sound a bit disgusting. And in India, cows are sacred, so they're just as shocked about us eating beef as we are about China eating dogs, although it's a common thing for us. But no, they do not eat dogs in Japan. I've got our final news story here from the past week, and it's about prisoners. Japan is well known for its exceptionally low crime rate, and at the end of 2019, the number of prisoners in Japan has reached a significantly low number. 0.0003% of the Japanese population are imprisoned in Japan, which is approximately 1 in every 2,625 people, assuming that I've done the maths correctly. That number is significantly less than the percentage of the UK's population in prison, which is 0.084, and they have double the population that we do. It's the first time in 23 years that this number has been less than 50,000, and the number reached an all-time high in 2006, with 80,000 people being imprisoned in Japan, and that is still nowhere near the lowest percentage of the UK's population being in prison. Many prisons across Japan will actually be permanently closing in the near future due to there being a lack of prisoners, which isn't something you hear every day. For our last question this week, we have, is it difficult to learn Japanese? And I've got a long answer here. I think it really depends on personal opinion, but as someone who is learning Japanese, here's what I think. There are a lot of aspects that make Japanese easier or harder to learn than other languages. If you already speak a second language in addition to your first language, I think it'll be a lot easier to learn. And if you know more languages, learning others will be easier. If you know a language like Chinese or Korean as a second language already, or a first, Japanese will be definitely much easier to learn because the grammar in those languages tend to be quite similar, and the Japanese grammar is nothing like English grammar or the grammar of any Latin-based languages. However, if the language you already know is not so much related to Japanese, it's going to be a lot harder to learn. For example, if you know Spanish and French, these words can be mixed up easily because they have quite similar words because they all have a Latin base. Although if you know Japanese and Korean, you might find it a little bit more tricky, unlike all the European languages with a Latin base. Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and other Asian languages similar to these don't really have a common root, so they don't stem from one language like how English, Spanish, and French all stem out from Latin. That's why they're Latin-based. So often the words between Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and all those languages don't tend to be really similar. And the words that do cross over are really quite few and far between. And I know I only know the Korean alphabet. I don't really know any sentences or anything like that, to be honest. But the alphabet sounds in the two languages aren't really similar. So if Korean is the other language you know, Japanese could be a good third, because while it would be easier to mix Japanese and Korean than Japanese and Spanish, it's still pretty unlikely. Personally, I don't speak another language fluently, although Japanese is probably my best out of the three that I have been taught. So if you don't already speak a second language, here's what you might find difficult to learn about Japanese. I think the first problem with Japanese is the alphabet systems. Japanese has 3 alphabet systems, and all of them can be used in one sentence. The first writing system is hiragana, used for Japanese words such as konnichiwa, meaning hello. The second writing system is katakana, which is used for foreign borrowed words. These are words taken from other languages, usually English but not always. These could be words such as koto, from English obviously meaning coat. It could be ramen, which is also borrowed in English, the word ramen, which is a noodles dish, which I think I mentioned earlier. So the word originally comes from Korean, although it's also borrowed from English. And then there are other words like pan, which comes from Spanish and means bread. So unless you know the language it comes from, you're not going to know what the word means easily there. And then there's kanji as the third writing system, and that's really complicated. Those are the Chinese characters used in Japanese to represent meaning, and sometimes the characters look like the thing they mean. to make it a bit easier. The kanji characters in Japanese are a lot simpler than the ones in Chinese, because in Chinese they need a lot more, because they only use kanji as their writing system in China, and every character has a different meaning, it has a different pronunciation, and in Chinese you need to learn 90,000 of these to be able to communicate in written Chinese. In Japan, however, it's a lot simpler. There's still a lot. There's approximately 2,100 to learn as of 2011. It's extremely difficult to know all of them, and many Japanese people can't remember half of them after leaving school. If you want to learn Japanese, I would say it's important to practice kanji characters every day, and you can learn a good amount of them in less than a year, I'd say. I've been learning Japanese for about 8 months, and I reckon I know about 600. As for the other factors that make learning Japanese difficult, the grammar is often no way similar to Japanese languages, which can make it tricky to learn, and the sounds aren't really similar to European languages, but to be fair, they aren't really difficult to pick up, I think. The sounds are quite easy to get the hang of, however, considering that in English we can have things such as the string of letters O, U, G, and H. They can be pronounced in about 6 different ways, depending on the consonants around it. However, in Japanese, they always have one way of being pronounced, a, I, U, E, or kaki, ku, ke, ko. That will never change. They're always going to be like that. It's not going to be ka, ka, ka. It's always going to be kaki, ku, ke, ko, a, I, U, E, o, etc. There are some things in Japanese that really make a lot of sense, though, which will really help you when you're learning the language. For example, the word for clock is toke, and the word for watch is udedoke. Ude meaning arm, because a watch is a clock for your arm, and this can be written by putting the kanji for arm before clock. And in this case, the pronunciation doesn't change, which it does sometimes, but it doesn't always, so it's a lot more helpful when it doesn't, by putting kanji together. Also, from what I've learnt so far, I wouldn't say I'm that good, fluent in Japanese, but I do know a fair bit. So from what I've learnt so far, verb conjugation is fairly easy, as the verb isn't always the thing that changes. Getting rid of any anomalies, and anyone who speaks a bit of Japanese will know what I mean by this. And in English we have words that follow rules, but then sometimes the rules can change. In Japanese you don't get this, so it's so much easier to learn and get the hang of, because you don't have to remember the exceptions and which words they are. It's just always going to be like that. I've been learning Japanese for just over 8 months now, like I said, and I've practiced every day for roughly 15 minutes to an hour. And I don't really struggle, but I'm not conversationally fluent, although I don't think I'm too far away. I hope. My Japanese is pretty good, but I wouldn't say I could hold a perfect conversation. So personally, I find Japanese not that much of a challenge, but there are definitely easier languages to learn. Although whether you'll find it easy isn't really something I can say. Different people will struggle with different things, and I don't massively struggle with Japanese, but I can't say how easy or hard you're going to find it. Although I completely encourage anyone trying to learn a new language, especially Japanese, and if you're finding it difficult, keep practicing what you know for as long as it takes before you fully understand what you're trying to learn, but most importantly, don't stop trying. I think that's all we've got time for. Tell me what you think of the show in the comment section below, along with any questions or stories you might have, and I'll try to answer as many of them as possible in the next show. And don't forget, you can send me an email through japanglishshow@gmail.com if you'd rather, and I'll be here at the same time next week to do it all again. See you then.